Midnight Static Files. The story you are about to hear has its roots hidden in the darkness of reality. It's up to you to believe it or not.
The sea has a way of keeping secrets, but some secrets are so unsettling that, more than a century later, they still refuse to be buried. In the freezing winter of 1900, 3 experienced lighthouse keepers disappeared from a lonely island in the North Atlantic without leaving behind a single body, a single witness, or a single clear answer. Their beds were still warm, the lighthouse stood silent, and the ocean was the only thing left alive to tell the story. What happened on the Flannan Isles has become one of history's greatest unsolved mysteries.
For centuries, sailors feared the North Atlantic. Its violent storms, towering waves, and endless gray horizon had swallowed countless ships without warning. But among all the tragedies linked to those unforgiving waters, one story continues to stand apart because it wasn't a ship that disappeared. It was 3 men living on an island where escape was almost impossible. The year was 1900. Winter had tightened its grip over the coast of western Scotland, where the Flannan Isles sat isolated more than 20 miles from the nearest inhabited land. 7 small rocky islands rose from the Atlantic like forgotten pieces of the earth, surrounded by crashing waves and relentless winds. To most people, they were little more than dangerous rocks on a map. To local fishermen, however, they were something else entirely. For generations, islanders from the nearby Outer Hebrides believed the Flannan Isles were cursed. They occasionally brought sheep there to graze on the rich grass, but almost nobody dared spend the night. Legends spoke of strange forces watching over the islands, and even the most hardened sailors preferred to leave before darkness fell. Whether those stories were born from superstition or centuries of unexplained events, no one could say. But they gave the islands an unsettling reputation long before the greatest mystery in their history unfolded. Despite these fears, progress eventually reached the Lonely Islands. During the 1890s, increasing maritime traffic through the dangerous waters convinced the Northern Lighthouse Board that a lighthouse was desperately needed. Construction proved to be a nightmare. Every beam of timber, every block of stone, and every piece of machinery had to be landed against rough seas that seemed determined to destroy the project before it could be completed. Workers battled violent weather for years before the lighthouse finally stood proudly atop Eilean Mòr, the largest of the 7 islands. On December 7, 1899, its powerful lantern shone across the Atlantic for the very first time. It became a beacon of safety for passing ships, warning captains away from the hidden rocks that had claimed so many vessels before. But keeping that light burning required constant human attention. 3 lighthouse keepers would live on the island at any given time, while a 4th rotated back to the mainland for rest. Their lives were defined by discipline and routine. Every lamp had to be cleaned, every mechanism carefully maintained, every weather observation faithfully recorded. Days blended into weeks in complete isolation, broken only by the arrival of the relief vessel bringing supplies and fresh faces. Exactly 1 year after the lighthouse began operating, Superintendent Robert Muirhead arrived to inspect the station. His visit appeared completely ordinary. The lighthouse was functioning perfectly, the keepers were in good spirits, and nothing hinted that history was about to remember this tiny island forever. When Muirhead prepared to leave on December 7, 1900, he climbed into the small launch waiting below the cliffs. Standing on the landing were the 3 men responsible for the lighthouse over the coming weeks. Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall, and James Ducat smiled and waved as their superintendent departed. Muirhead returned the gesture without a second thought. To him, it was simply another routine farewell after another successful inspection. What he didn't know was that those few seconds would become one of the most haunting memories of his life. Because as his boat drifted farther into the gray Atlantic, Robert Muirhead unknowingly became the last confirmed person ever to see all 3 lighthouse keepers alive. 19 long days passed. On the night of December 15th, only 8 days after Muirhead's departure, an American cargo ship called the SS Archtor sailed past the Flannan Isles on its journey from Philadelphia to Edinburgh. As the captain glanced toward Eilean Mòr shortly before midnight, something immediately caught his attention. The lighthouse was dark. For an isolated rock station whose single purpose was to protect ships at sea, that was almost unthinkable. The powerful beam that should have been sweeping across the Atlantic had vanished into the night. The captain reported the alarming sight as soon as his ship reached port, but nature had other plans. Powerful storms battered the Scottish coast for days, making any rescue attempt impossible. Meanwhile, nobody on the mainland knew whether the keepers were battling mechanical problems, sheltering from dangerous weather, or already gone. The relief ship, Hesperus, had originally been scheduled to sail on December 20th, but relentless winds and rough seas delayed its departure until the morning of Boxing Day, December 26th. Aboard the vessel was relief keeper Joseph Moore, eager to begin his shift. As the Hesperus approached Eilean Mòr, Captain Jim Harvey followed the normal arrival procedure.
3 long blasts from the ship's horn echoed across the cliffs. A distress flare streaked into the cold sky. Normally, the lighthouse keepers would appear within minutes, waving from the landing and preparing to unload supplies. This time, nothing. No figures appeared on the rocks. No answering signal came from the lighthouse. Even the flagpole stood bare, its flag missing. The island felt unnaturally silent. Only the cries of circling seabirds and the thunder of waves crashing against the cliffs broke the stillness. It wasn't simply quiet, it felt abandoned. Sensing that something was terribly wrong, Joseph Moore stepped ashore alone. He climbed the steep path toward the lighthouse, repeatedly calling the names of Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall, and James Ducat. No one answered. As he reached the compound, he noticed the entrance gate was closed. The main door was also shut. Nothing appeared to have been forced open. Inside, the atmosphere became even stranger. The lighthouse itself looked orderly. The lamps had been carefully cleaned and refilled, ready for service. The beds had clearly been slept in, their blankets left untidy as though the men had expected to return at any moment. The dishes had been washed and neatly put away. Cold ashes rested in the fireplace, suggesting the fire had died many hours earlier. At first glance, it looked less like the home of missing men and more like a place temporarily left unattended. Then Moore noticed something that made the silence even more unsettling. A single chair lay overturned in the kitchen. It wasn't smashed. It wasn't broken. It simply rested on its side, as though someone had risen suddenly and never returned. Nearby, every clock inside the lighthouse had stopped. No struggle, no blood, no signs of panic, just a building frozen in time. Moore hurried back to the Hesperus and informed Captain Harvey of what he had found. Soon, several crew members joined him as they began a systematic search of the island. The eastern landing, where Muirhead had departed only weeks before, appeared perfectly normal. But everything changed when they reached the western side of Eilean Mòr. Here, the Atlantic had left behind unmistakable evidence of unimaginable force. A storage box positioned more than 100 feet above sea level had been smashed to pieces. Heavy iron railings had been bent as though they were made of soft wire. A railway track used for hauling supplies had been ripped completely out of its concrete foundation. Most astonishing of all, a massive boulder weighing over a ton had been moved from its original position, something that seemed almost impossible without the power of an enormous wave. Even the grassy ground high above the cliffs had been torn away, leaving scars stretching several meters inland. Whatever had struck the western landing had possessed incredible destructive power. And somewhere amid that destruction, 3 experienced lighthouse keepers had vanished without leaving behind a single trace. The search continued throughout the island, but it revealed nothing. No footprints leading away from the lighthouse, no damaged boat, no signs of a fight. Most haunting of all, no bodies. It was as though Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall, and James Ducat had simply ceased to exist. Investigators soon examined the lighthouse logbook, hoping it would explain the strange disappearance. The final entry, had been written at around 9 o'clock on the morning of December 15th. It mentioned storm damage around the western landing, but nothing unusual about the men's behavior. Contrary to many stories repeated over the decades, there were no entries describing terrified keepers, no mysterious crying, no supernatural fears, and no references to strange voices in the night. Those details were invented years later by magazines eager to make the mystery even more sensational. The real evidence was far simpler, and, in many ways, even more disturbing. 2 sets of heavy oilskins were missing. One complete set still hung neatly inside the lighthouse. That meant one of the 3 men had stepped outside without wearing the protective clothing every experienced keeper relied upon during brutal winter storms. Such a decision made very little sense. Lighthouse keepers were trained professionals who understood exactly how dangerous the Atlantic could become. Why would anyone willingly rush outside into such weather? Captain Harvey sent an urgent telegram to the Northern Lighthouse Board. Its opening words captured the shock of everyone involved. "A dreadful accident has happened at the Flannans." Those words would echo through history. The official investigation eventually reached what seemed to be the most reasonable explanation. Marshall and Ducat had probably gone to inspect or secure equipment damaged by the violent seas near the western landing. According to lighthouse regulations, one keeper always had to remain inside so the station would never be left unattended. Donald MacArthur most likely stayed behind. Then something unexpected happened. Perhaps MacArthur looked through the lighthouse window and saw an enormous wall of water racing toward his colleagues. Realizing they were in danger, he may have rushed outside without stopping to put on his oilskins. In his haste, he knocked over the kitchen chair before sprinting through the door. Moments later, an enormous rogue wave crashed against the cliffs, powerful enough to bend iron, powerful enough to move a 1-ton boulder, powerful enough to sweep away 3 grown men before any of them had a chance to escape. It is an explanation supported by the storm damage found on the island, and even today, many historians believe it is the most likely answer. But even that theory leaves behind uncomfortable questions. If MacArthur rushed out in panic, why was the lighthouse door found closed? Why was the compound gate secured? How could 3 seasoned lighthouse keepers, men who had spent years facing violent seas, all be caught by the same wave? And perhaps the greatest mystery of all, why were none of their bodies ever recovered? The Atlantic has returned many victims to its shores over the years, yet Donald MacArthur, Thomas Marshall, and James Ducat were never seen again. That absence has allowed countless theories to flourish. Some believe one man murdered the others before taking his own life. Others imagine foreign spies landing secretly on the island. Local folklore speaks of ghostly visitors arriving by boat beneath the cover of darkness. More imaginative stories tell of sea monsters rising from the waves, mysterious spirits haunting the ancient islands, or even extraterrestrials carrying the keepers away into the night. None of these theories have ever been supported by evidence, yet the complete lack of answers continues to fuel them more than a century later. The lighthouse itself remained in service for decades after the tragedy. Keepers continued their lonely work without experiencing another unexplained disappearance. In 1971, the station was finally automated, ending the era of permanent human isolation on Eilean Mòr. Today, the light still shines across the Atlantic, while maintenance crews visit only occasionally before leaving the island once again to the wind, the sea, and the silence. Perhaps that silence is the most haunting part of this entire story. A place once filled with the voices of 3 men became a monument to one unanswered question. Superintendent Robert Muirhead never forgot his final meeting with them. In his official report written just weeks after the tragedy, he reflected on a memory that would remain with him forever. He wrote that he had visited the keepers only days before their disappearance, carrying the melancholy knowledge that he had been the last person to shake each of their hands. and bid them farewell. More than 125 years have passed since that cold December. The ocean has erased every physical trace. The wind still sweeps across the empty cliffs. The lighthouse still watches over passing ships. But somewhere beneath those restless Atlantic waves, the final moments of the three Flannan Isles lighthouse keepers remain one of history's most enduring and chilling mysteries.